Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. And today we're doing a video that's been requested by one of my subscribers, which is how to set up crow braking on a Futaba transmitter. But first up, let's talk about why you'd want to use crow braking. So crow braking is typically used on gliders, and it's used to take the lift out of the wing, add more drag onto it to slow the model down so you're able to land in a much smaller place. And with the great big gliders like the 3-meter Swift that I used to fly, which is quite a heavy glider as well, a really efficient wing, it's great to be able to knock the lift out of the wing to bring it down for landing. So how does it work? Typically you have to have flaps and you have to have ailerons. You bring the flaps down as you would normally to create more drag on the wing, and then you also bring the ailerons up to create additional drag, and that's what slows up the aircraft. Now, I'm not an expert by any means, but I have got it configured on one of my models, and we're going to configure it today on a different model as well. So I say it's typically used on a glider, but I've also seen it used on fixed wing aircraft as well, traditional prop aircraft, which have got flaps for the same reason, just take out the lift of the wing so you can land it a lot quicker. And I've also seen it used on biplanes as well. So even though biplanes haven't got flaps, they have got two wings, and you can use the lower wing ailerons to act as flaps and the upper wing ailerons to go up the opposite way, and it has the same effect as well, slowing up that aircraft by adding more drag to the wing. So I was asked whether we could set this up on the Futaba T18SZ. What I'm actually going to do though is use the Futaba T26SZ instead, because the model I've selected today, which we'll come on to, is all set up and ready to go on this transmitter. The software between these two transmitters is very, very similar. It's the same software, 26 just has a few more bells and whistles on it, so you should be able to follow along regardless if you're on the T18, T26, T32 or T16, or even if you don't fly Futaba, the principle and what we're talking about today, you should be able to get this working on your own transmitter. Right, let's find a model. So the model we're going to use today is my trusty Turbo Bushmaster from Extreme Flight, and I absolutely love this model. It was new at the beginning of this season, and I've got a lot of flights on it throughout the year. It's just a lot of fun, and it has what we need today to be able to do this video. So it obviously has ailerons, and they're on separate channels, and I'll come back to that point. And it's also on flaps, which are also on separate channels as well. So this is the model. You're going to have to use your imagination a little bit. So not being able to plug in the right side wing because there just simply isn't enough space to get it together in the workshop. I can just about get it in at this angle, but hopefully it works for you guys. So let's go to the transmitter and start talking about the configuration. Okay, so first off, let's talk about our starting point. So the Bushmaster is already configured on my transmitter, so everything's working, the model has been flown. I'm not going to go through a full model setup, we're just going through how to add crow braking or air brakes onto this existing setup. So the very first thing you want to check is your model configuration. So first off, go into linkage menu and check your model type. Now, pause, word of warning here. If you change any of the configuration here, it is likely to take out your entire configuration for your model. So before you do anything in here, if it is different to what I'm about to say, please make sure you back up your model. And the quickest way to do that is go back into Model Select and create a copy of your model onto your SD card or a copy internally. Okay, so model type. So your model type really must match the configuration you have in your model. Now, I might be teaching you to suck eggs here, but it's surprising how many people don't know this, and this makes it setting up your model a lot easier on the Futaba transmitters because you get more predefined mixes once this is set correctly. Now, you can do everything by hand doing manual mixing, but it's better to use the mixing that comes out of the box, and I'll show you that on the next screen shortly. So on the Turbo Bushmaster, we have two separate ailerons, aileron and aileron 2. And what I mean by separate is they are on separate servos. They're not connecting in any way. Separate servos going into the receiver. And we have two flaps as well on separate servos. Now, you probably can do this if the flaps are linked, because the flaps just need to be able to go down. But you definitely want your ailerons on separate servos to be able to achieve this, because both ailerons are going to go up at the same time. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, whether you can get away of using just two servos for the whole setup, but for me, and for the point of this video, oh, let's come out of here, I've got 4 servos. It doesn't really matter about what's going on at the rear end, although we are going to add a little mix on the elevator as part of this setup, which I'll come on to shortly. But first thing, make sure that is correct. If it is wrong and you do go ahead and change it to the correct one, be warned, it will take out your configuration for your model. So now we know that's correct. If we go back into aeroplane, or this might be glider, if you have a glider set up, you'll find that you've now got some additional options in here and some preset mixes: aileron to camber flap, rudder to aileron, camber flap to elevator, air brake to elevator, air brake setting down here. So depending on how your wing type is defined will depend on what options you get on page 1 and page 2. And again, you may have some different ones here as well, because this is a T26. For example, T18 won't have the gyro setting or gyro options. Okay, so air brake is what we're going to use to set this up. And then within the screen here, we can set the switch, so turn the function on, set it to a switch, whether it's manual or automatic. There's some delay settings as well as a cut switch. There's speed as to how the controls are applied, which I'll show you shortly. But the most of your configuration is actually on page 2. So the offset, if you read this coming along here, the offset is at the top half of this box. Aileron, aileron 2, offset for flap, flap 2, and you can even offset the elevator as well. Because when you typically apply flaps to a model, the model will balloon because it's getting extra lift, so you'll need to bring in the elevator, typically down elevator, to counteract that, to keep flying straight and level. So let's go ahead and get this configured. So back on page 1, let's start off by turning the function on, and let's go and set a switch. One of the nice features on the T26 is you can actually now just flick a switch and it will start setting it for you. So I'm going to set SE here. I'm going to have it so that when the switch is away from me in either position 2 or 3, it's on. Come back out of here and we can test that switch. You can see as I flick it now, position 1 off, 2, 3 on. And then if we just go ahead onto page 2 and apply an offset, so I'm going to put in an amount here, 30 on both the control surfaces or for the ailerons, both servos rather, and 30 for the flap. And then when I'm flicking this switch on in and out, that's what the mix that it's applying. It's applying plus 30 to control surfaces and plus 30 to flaps as well. So let's see what that now does to the model. Okay, so still on that same screen. So if the model on, if I just use the flaps as per normal on my slider, you can see they still work. Nothing's changed there. Now when I flick the SE switch, enable this function, you see straight away I've got flaps have gone down and the aileron has gone up. Simple as that. And it's reading those settings. Let's just turn that screen back on from here. So if I was to decrease the offset down to 30, you'll see that I'll get less movement now when I turn it on. And you can do it live as well. You can leave the switch on and you can actually increase, so on and so forth. Now I would suggest, if you're starting this off for the first time, is that you bring these down and don't have quite so much movement. Just see what effect it makes on your particular model. So I'm just going to leave that on 30 and I'm going to get the flaps to match as well. And there we go. So simple. Now, even though I've got that enabled and got that turned on, if I go back to my slider and operate my flaps, watch what happens. You can just see there, I know it's slightly off screen, but the flap is still working separately on that slider. And yeah, I also have negative flaps configured on this model as well, which I'll talk about at the end. So it kind of overrides it, the flap configuration overrides it. If I put that back to middle, the flap's still down because the switch is now overriding. So I have to take that out completely. So just be a little bit warned about that as to the priority and how things work there. Now with it off, I've still got flaps working on the slider. And you see my elevator mix as well, which is set up on my flap mix. And then turn it on, the flap is there, and I can only get so much extra movement on the flap. I have to go back to the middle and turn it off. Okay, so stay on this screen and let me show you some of the other configuration. Okay, so if I wanted to now build in some elevator mix, I can simply just come in here and say I want a little bit of elevator applied at the same time. So all of this is coming together at the same time. So note we're only using the top half of these settings, which is the offset. And this row is also the offset, it's just not labelled on this row. Bottom row is fine tuning, which I'll come on to in a minute. So that's everything we need to now. So now when I flick that switch in now, we'll get a little bit of elevator as well. However, you will notice that when I put the switch in, it's quite aggressive. So we go back to page 1, we can change the speed of how the servos apply this mix. So get it's coming gradually on each of these control surfaces separately, the speed coming in when I flick the switch on, and the speed coming out when I flick the switch to off. So if I go ahead here and just demonstrate this, and just say we want 20, and we'll do it across all channels evenly, including our elevator. So it can come in nice and gradual, and it's not violent when I flick this when I'm flying. Now watch the difference. So testing the speed function, if I flick the switch now, you can see the difference. In, out. I'll just go and exaggerate that even further by putting these speeds right up, so as far as I go, which is 27, just so you can see it easier, and flick it in. You see it's really coming in slowly until it hits our setting, and out. Going out slowly as well. Now again, that speed hasn't impacted my normal flap. I can still move that, in my case, on my slider independently. 27 is way too harsh, way too slow, so I'm going to bring that back down. And show it working on 15. And now, there we go, everything's set to 15. Flick the switch. See, it slowed it down just enough. In fairness, I think where we were first at 20 is probably a good setting. So there we go, we've got all the 20s. Flick the switch. Nice. Nice and slow. So that will stop the model jumping or jerking where you're flying, and you flick that switch. Okay, let's go back to the bench because there's one more setting I want to show you. Okay, so the first time you try this out, you probably find it's not going to be right. It is going to change from model to model. It's going to change depending on the weight of the model and how efficient the model is as well. So you might want to adjust the tuning of it in air, and this is where fine tuning comes in. So back on page 1, if you look down the bottom here, you've got control fine tuning. If we go ahead and assign this to a dial, typically, so I'm going to use LD at the top, just by selecting it, and then go back to the previous screen. You can say, you know, we've now got control LD, we can have it linear. Not quite sure what Alt plus is, I have to look that up, or Alt minus, but I'm going to leave mine on symmetrical. Go to page 2. Now this is where the other half of this box comes into place, is how much do you want to adjust the fine tuning from that dial? How much movement, additional movement do you want to have? So I'm going to say on each of these, I want a +10. So every time I tweak that dial, I'll get a +10 on all of these, all at the same. Now you might want to leave the elevator off, depending on exactly what you're doing. Just for the purpose of this, I'm going to leave it all together. Now let me show you what happens. Now, there we go, we've still got the fine tuning configured. And you can see it on the second half of these boxes, the lower half of the boxes, 10 on each. And I've got it on the dial. So if I go and turn the mix on first, there's SE. Now what happens when I adjust the dial? You can see I'm getting more movement. So it's in the middle, twist it any direction, you can see that it's gone extra movement. Now if I wanted to make that more aggressive, I'll just go and change the fine tuning. So put everything on 20. Now when I adjust, I'm getting more movement on every surface where I've configured it. You can just about see in the background as well, the elevator adjusting, some down elevator. There you go, it's only increasing because I've only applied positive. And that's how fine tuning works. So it's a good way of adjusting it in the air. So we now have 3 switches / dials to think about. We have our mix, and that's when that's active, fine tuning is active, and then we also have our original flap slider on the back here as well. So be a little bit careful when you're adding more control and movement, that you remember what's doing what and the order of how it works. So guys, I hope that's helped. That's just a very quick tutorial on setting up air brakes on the Futaba transmitters. For me, I'm actually going to leave that on now. I'm going to leave that configured and I'm going to go and have a flight with it and see how much it helps slow up this Bushmaster. To be honest with you though, this is a high wing plane. It's known for slowing up, and with full flaps on it, it comes in really nice as well, so I probably won't need to use it. It's probably just a bit of a gimmick for me on this, but hopefully it's helped you. If you configure it any other way to that, please put a comment down below and share that, and perhaps I'll film that one separately if there's a different method of setting it up. But for me, that's how I go about it, and it works rather well. Guys, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Liking the video helps promote it in YouTube. Subscribing to my channel and hitting the notification bell lets you know when the next video is out automatically. I'll see you next time round.